Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Amateur Traveler, episode 938. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about a cider house and a world-famous art museum, ramparts and pelota courts, pinchos and chocolate, as we go to the Basque Country in France and Spain. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about the Basque Country. I'd like to welcome back to the show Craig from Dallas, who's come to talk to us about the Basque region in France and Spain. Craig, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again. Looking forward to talking about another fun region.
And I say welcome back. Craig was on not all that long ago talking about the Languedoc region in southern France, which I particularly enjoyed, not just the Languedoc, but that particular episode. So welcome back. When you talk about the Basque region in France and Spain, can we put that on the map?
Yeah, so I guess if you're thinking about what is the Basque region, there's some in France and some in Spain, just a little bit in France, a lot more in Spain. But it goes roughly from Bayonne in southwest France near the coast. So that would be south of Bordeaux if you're trying to think of it on a map. And then it goes south from that area along the Atlantic coast with the Pyrenees Mountains in the background. So that would be a fairly small region there in France. And then if you cross the border from France to Spain and you continue south along the coast, then you're in San Sebastian, and then eventually you go to Bilbao. So it's all along the Bay of Biscay on the Atlantic Ocean. So that's the region that goes along the coast. And then somewhat towards the interior of Spain, it would border on places like Rioja, and then going back towards Pamplona. So that's the region. It's a fairly small region overall, but a very unique area. And I think you probably could somewhat summarize it by saying if you ask somebody from the Basque Country where they were from, whether they were on the French side or the Spanish side, I think most would probably say they're Basque, not French or Spanish first. They would say they're Basque first, and they'd be very proud of that because that region's had a long independence streak, and it's got a lot of interesting aspects about it.
In terms of a people, too, the Basque people are one of the oldest peoples in Europe. This language being, we think, one of the first languages in Europe. They have a reason to be proud of that region.
It's a relatively small region, but there's really a lot of historic people that come from this area, even as small as it is. Being close to the ocean, not surprisingly, they've been famous over the centuries for sailors and explorers and being very hardy on that somewhat rough area of the Atlantic. But apparently Columbus's ship, the Santa Maria, it was Basque built, as were most of his crew on that voyage. Magellan, who everybody knows was the first to circumnavigate the globe, but actually he was killed halfway into that journey. So he really didn't circumnavigate the globe. It was actually his second in command, a guy named Elcano, who was also a Basque. And that guy actually was the one that completed circumnavigation. They've got some interesting people that have been there that are tied to that particular place. And they have a much bigger impact on history than you might think from just being a fairly small area.
Excellent. And why should someone go to the Basque region?
I think that, like I was mentioning, it's a very unique region. So it's got some unique architecture. It's got unique history. The culture is very unique and it's fairly compact, so you can get around and explore the whole thing in a week. And there's obviously some other things that you could go see if you wanted to spend a little more time. But what we found interesting about the Basque region, and it's what we enjoy about traveling, is going to a place that really is truly unique from other regions around it. And so the Basque region, as I said, it's got unique food, wine, architecture, people. The weather is very nice. It's being on the coast mostly. It's, I think, a little more temperate. So it's probably not so hot in the summer and not so cold in the winter, although it's going to have those seasons a little bit, but it's going to be a little more moderate than maybe on the interior of Spain or the coast of Spain or France. And in particular, the culinary scene in the Basque region is really one of the things that it's most famous for. The food there is phenomenal. Being a region that straddles both France with all of its good food culture and Spain with all of its good food culture, and then being close to the coast, so it's also got a great seafood. But the pinchos scene in the Basque Country in general is just amazing. I've never had a place that's got such good food as that, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. But it's just a beautiful place to see: food, coast, beaches. As I mentioned on another different episode, I'm always a sucker for the Camino de Santiago. So that also goes through the Basque region a couple of different ways, through Pamplona, and then there's another one that goes along the coast. So there's just a lot of different things to see.
Excellent. And we have done an episode on the Spanish part of this before, but it's been over 6 years ago or so, over 320 episodes. So if you go back, I'll put a link to that in the show notes if people want to listen to that episode also if they're heading to that area. What itinerary are you going to recommend for us, Craig?
So I've tried to come up with a week schedule that takes you from one end of the Basque Country to the other, and this is the way we did it. The first day on arrival, I think you would probably want to come into Bayonne. So Bayonne is a fairly big city, a little bit south of Bordeaux, and to fly into that area, Biarritz, France, is the nearest international airport, so it's fairly easy to fly into that specific city. Or if you happen to be in France already and you were trying to connect this trip with Bordeaux or even Paris, the TGV fast train will get you here fairly quickly. But I think, again, the starting point would probably be to start in the town of Bayonne. And I guess just for organizational purposes, we didn't get a car on the France side because it's really easy once you get here to navigate these towns by local trains. So we didn't bother to get a car and fool with it. It's fairly easy to get around. So the first city that we started with is Bayonne, which is interesting where the name bayonet comes from some of the Napoleonic times that they fought battles. So I guess they did a good job on their defense to coin the phrase bayonet.
Not know that.
And the old town of Bayonne, it's a beautiful old historical town. It's got a lot of the things that you think of with beautiful old French towns. It's got a beautiful cathedral that's there with beautiful artwork. There's bridges that go across the river. There's a fairly large river that goes through Bayonne that's very pretty, bisecting it. There are lots of plazas that you can go see. There are ramparts that you can walk on. Of course, like most places in France, there's a market hall that you can go see that's very cool to see the regional foods they have there. And a couple of the things that are interesting from the food perspective for Bayonne in general, I didn't know that they were famous for this until we went there, but they're very famous for chocolate. So they make their own chocolate there. There's a specific kind of chocolate that comes from Bayonne that was very good. And then they have a famous ham that they make as well there. It probably tastes a lot like a good Spanish ham, but they're very proud of their Bayonne ham that comes from there. And so you'll see the cheeses, the hams, the chocolates in all the stores there. And then there's also a tart there that they make from cherries that are grown in that area. And they were all very good. All the foods are fun to try when you go to a new place and see all the things that they're famous for. So it's a very pretty city that you can walk around very easily in the old town and explore it and check out the architecture, the foods. And it's a very pretty place to start your visit at.
Any other sites we want to see before we leave Bayonne?
In Bayonne itself, they also have a Basque Culture Museum. And there's also another one that we'll mention later on in the trip. But if you're trying to go to a museum and see something that's very specific about the Basque culture, which I would recommend trying to go to one of these, this will be your first chance to do it on this itinerary. There'll be one towards the latter part of the trip as well. But I think if I were recommending this first day, I would really just say explore Bayonne. It's your first day there, so there may be a little jet lag. So just seeing the city and the museums and trying some of the food, I think that's a good first day in the Basque Country.
Okay.
So the second day, if you're moving from Bayonne to some of the other areas in the French Basque Country, there's a couple of towns there that we stayed at that I think are fun to see. The first is Biarritz. So that's the town that I mentioned before that you could fly into as well. So it's interesting because these two towns are very different. Biarritz is a beachfront, very full in the summer, a lot of things to do, casinos, big glitzy hotels, surfer mecca for that region. And so that's what Biarritz is. And if you're not staying there, you can see it fairly quickly in maybe half a day. There's a pretty promenade. You can walk along the beaches and see the casino. They've got some pretty old churches all along the waterfront that have a lot of ships hanging inside it, little model ships that you'll see a lot in the Basque Country. That was an interesting thing to see that I hadn't seen in other regions, where I'm sure over the centuries, sailors that are either thankful for being saved or maybe trying to have something to bring them good luck for the upcoming season. But you'll see that in a lot of the churches where they'll have just hundreds and hundreds of wooden ships that people have built hanging from the ceiling. So that was an interesting, fun thing to look at. But Biarritz is very different because I said the glitz and the hotels and the modern looking buildings and casino. And then you go to the next small town, which is just right along the coast a little further down. And that's where we stayed. And that's a place called Saint-Jean-de-Luz. And so it has more of a smaller beach type town, but not near the glitz that Biarritz has. There's no big casinos and big glitzy hotels. But we stayed there just because it felt a little more authentic and smaller scale. It's got a working port that still is pretty active. So they've got a lot of seafood there. There's a lot of pretty town squares. And I think the reason that Saint-Jean-de-Luz is famous is because in 1660, the King of Spain, who was living in El Escorial in Spain at that time, gave away his daughter in marriage to the King of France, who was living in Versailles. So Saint-Jean-de-Luz was selected just because it was halfway between Madrid and Paris, and basically it was on the border of the two countries. And that's where basically the king and future queen got married here in Saint-Jean-de-Luz. So that's, I think, its big claim to fame history-wise.
Okay.
And interestingly, they have macaroons, which don't necessarily taste that much different than a macaroon that you could get in a lot of places in France. But there's a very famous place there in Saint-Jean-de-Luz that's been making them apparently since 1660. And they have supposedly this specific recipe for macaroons that is really good, but they're apparently the same recipe that they served at the wedding of the king and queen. A fun thing to try there. And they've also got markets there and a pretty beach that you can walk along, some town squares, very good restaurants. You'll walk around and you'll see pelota courts. So that's a Basque sport that's similar to jai that you might have run across in Florida, but that's a big Basque popular sport in that region. So it's a very pretty town. So between the two, Biarritz or Saint-Jean-de-Luz, you can pick which one you wanted to do based on what kind of activities you might want to have. We also did, when we were exploring these two towns, we took a guide it made it worth a lot because he just pointed out a lot of things that we would not have seen. I think I sent you the info that you could put in the show notes. But he did an excellent job guiding us, showed us a lot of things in Bayonne and Biarritz and Saint-Jean-de-Luz. And then also we did an afternoon where we drove up into the Pyrenees. So he had a car, so he took us up into the Pyrenees and took us to some of the really small French villages that are in the Basque region, but in the foothills of the Pyrenees. And we would have never found these places or recognized all the little interesting things that we were seeing. But there was one town called Espelette that's famous for its red peppers. So everywhere that you would drive around, you would see red peppers hanging from the rafters or the front porch, looking like what you might think of in New Mexico. But it was just interesting because you're in France and the houses look completely different. There's a very interesting Basque-looking architecture where white stucco, but red shutters and half timbered, but it doesn't really look like a German building. It's very colorful, and it's a very interesting architecture that they have in the Basque Country. And then walking around, you'll see a lot of things that kind of look Celtic looking, like their tombstones in the graveyards and a lot of the signs that they have carved in stone that are obviously very old, but the font almost looks very Celtic looking. But of course, you can't understand what any of it says because it's all in Basque. So it's an interesting blend of Basque, French, Celtic looking stuff. And I just thought going up into the village was a really fun thing to do if you've got time to do on that second day as well.
And I was trying to figure out the name, St. John de Luz, and I was mistranslating it as St. John of Light. But this is not Spanish here, and apparently it's St. John Place Made of Mud. It's St. John's Swamp, named after the frequent flooding in the wintertime. This whole area, when I was in the Basque region last year, gets torrential, epic storms in the wintertime. Because you're on the Atlantic coast, it really can get quite large waves and such. And apparently St. John's gets a fair amount of mud at that time, or at least historically used to.
That doesn't surprise me. It is pretty open to the elements all along that coast. So the guys that are there are pretty rugged. I think St. John de Luz also, the port that's there is the same historic port apparently that they've had since basically the pirate days there, when the Basque guys were more pirates than they were working for Columbus or Magellan or something like that. But yeah, I think they're a pretty hardy group.
Interesting.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Xyzal is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Xyzal keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all. Take Xyzal. At night.
So that takes us through day 2. So now we've explored 2 days on the French side of the Basque region. So now we're going into day 3, and now we've got to cross the border. To cross the border, we just took a taxi because even though you think you're going to take a taxi and cross the border, that seems like it's something bigger than it is. But they're so close to each other, it really is easy to do that. Or you can take a train too, but then you have to switch trains because for some strange reason, the train lines have to stop on France, and then everybody has to get off and get on a different train and then go into Spain because of some train issue that they have there. So we didn't stop and do that because we just took a taxi just to get across fairly quickly. But the interesting fact about that border crossing where the train lines end is that is where Hitler and Franco met in 1940 when they were trying to size each other up and try to decide whether to cooperate in World War II, where at the time Hitler controlled all of France, but not Spain, and Franco obviously was in charge of Spain at that time. And so they met at the border to decide whether they were going to work together or not and size each other up. So it's an interesting spot. That's where that took place there, where people today have to cross the border and switch trains just like they did back then. So the first thing that we did when we crossed the border to San Sebastian, we actually still had our guide that day as well because he was very close to the border, so it was just as easy for him to come over and meet us. So the first day in San Sebastian, we did a morning walking and pinchos tour because that's for sure something you got to have pinchos when you go to the Spanish side of the border for sure. And there's many choices of pinchos tours that you can go on, but they're all really good and fun in Old Town. And then you wash it down with what they call in the Spanish side, chocolate. So I won't try to really pronounce it well, but it's got a very unusual spelling. But once you know that's how it sounds, you can just think of it that way because you absolutely won't come up with that pronunciation if you look at how it's spelled out. But that's their version of a light, sparkling white wine. and then Sidra, which is just Spanish for cider. But that's what they'll have at a lot of the Pinchos places, the light white wine or the cider, because that's what they're famous for in that region. Just walking around San Sebastian to get an idea of what it's like. It's a beautiful city. I think its heyday was probably in the 1800s. That was its belle epoque, when a lot of royalty decided this was the place to come and take the waters. And so the buildings are very beautiful, reminiscent of that time, versus it doesn't feel medieval. It feels more 1800s, maybe the 1900s.
That old part of town, right near the mountain at the headlands of the two bays that are San Sebastian, is more the Gothic quarter. So that's a little older than that. But then inland from there, you get more of the 1800s part of the city. Honestly, in my opinion, if you have a discussion of the prettiest cities in Europe, San Sebastian has to at least be part of that discussion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Especially if you're looking down on it from the hill opposite the town with its great circular almost bay with beautiful beach and blue-green water. It's quite a pretty place.
Yeah, and
on a sunny day, which you don't always have in this part of the coast. This is a green coast.
Yeah, we lucked out. I think it was nice weather the time that we're there, but you're right. I think that when it rains, it's not near as much fun there.
Yeah, I spent about half and half rainy days and half sunny days there.
But you're right about the city is beautiful, and it's not really that large, so you really can't get lost. It's all laid out along the beautiful beachfront and promenade. As you said, it goes from one sort of smallish mountain to another smallish mountain on the other side. And then they've got the city all laid out along the beach. It's not that large. It's easy to explore. There's lots of beautiful things to see. There's no, that's where that site is. They don't have any of those kind of sites in the city itself. It's really overall ambiance and pretty, and you've got a beach and you can look at the mountains, and it's just a lot of fun walking around and people watching. And of course, again, not to oversell it, but the food and the drink culture there is unbelievable. I think you could probably go Pincho bar hopping every night. As many nights as you're there, that's what I would recommend doing versus trying to go to a specific restaurant, although there's many good restaurants. But the Pincho scene is just amazing to go to because every bar has their specialty, and they've got a bunch of others that they make, but they all are proud of one specific thing that they do. And so for sure, figure out what that is and get it from that place. They're not really very expensive. A Pincho might be anywhere from, say, 2 to 5 euros each. And then for 2 to 3 euros, you're going to get a glass of wine. And the recommendation is really just get one, what that one is famous for, or maybe, another one. But, if you get too many, you're not going to make very many stops. So really the ideal way to do it is, try to figure out 3 or 4 or more places to stop and then just get whatever that bar specialty is and a drink. And then once you finish it, you go on to the next. And it's a fun scene to do that.
I'll link a post that I have on San Sebastian and Bilbao in the show notes. I ended up going with a recommendation of a local to Bar Martinez, which is one of the many different Pincho bars. And again, a lot of these not very big. You're lucky if you get there early enough to find a table.
They are, especially if you're going to go on the weekend nights. And it's fun because you clearly know that's where the locals are doing it as well, because it's a fun touristy thing to do for sure. And it is a little intimidating. I don't know. Intimidating may not be the best description, but you have to just elbow your way up to the bar, and because nobody's going to come and ask you or take an order. I mean, if you don't make your way up to the bar, and then you basically are just pointing, since I don't speak Basque, and they just give it to you, and then you think, well, maybe I should pay for it, but they don't make you do that. They just serve it up, give it to you, and then it's essentially on the honor system where you pay when you go. And at least most places, they just counted how many toothpicks you had. Again, it's the honor system. So if you had a couple of toothpicks on your plate when you brought it back, they would know that you had 2 or 3 or however many that you had. So it's a kind of a fun experience and makes you feel like you're doing something that the locals are doing. And as people eat them, Seems odd until you see everybody else is doing it, but everybody just gets their napkin after they wipe their hands and their face. They just throw the napkins on the floor. So when you walk in, it's strange because you see the floor is just covered in napkins and you think,
I did not see that.
What happened?
Interesting.
But you see everybody else just throwing it on the floor versus looking for a trash can, and then they just sweep it up at some point. And it's one of those places where you just dive in and you just do what the locals are doing, and then it's a fun time.
Excellent. I don't know if you got up to Mount Urgil, which is the one that's just above the old town there, and there's a fortress there and a great view of the city from there.
Yeah, we went to both of them. On one, there's like you said, there's a pretty fortress with a hike that you can go up to that one.
Right.
And that one I did. My wife didn't want to do that hike to go all the way up there, but it was fun and I thought it was very pretty. And then the other hill on the other end, you can reach that by a funicular. Right. And it's also got a really pretty view on the other end, but they're both worth going up to.
And that second one has a old-fashioned amusement park that I did not get to when I was there, unfortunately. I didn't plan it right.
It does. It was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't realize that was what was up there, but you can imagine it being like a very small scale down Disneyland. It's not near that big, but it's got little roller coasters and little rides, and it was actually not operating when we were there. I think it was before the season had opened. But yeah, it's funny to think that there's a bunch of screaming kids on the top of this mountain looking down over the San Sebastian beach and precariously having these roller coasters going over the edge of the mountain. So yeah, it did look like it would be an interesting experience.
And some of the best views I have seen of the town are from videos I've seen of the log flume ride way up there on Mount Agueldo. But I didn't get there. I didn't plan far enough advance that the day I planned to go, I didn't realize it wasn't open. I think it was open only on the weekends when I was there.
Yeah, there's a lot to see in San Sebastian, but like I said, it's more just wandering the streets, looking at how pretty everything is, and making sure that you save time for the pinchos and bar hopping, but then save some room because then the next day, at least in the itinerary that I wrote out, so this is day 2 in San Sebastian, we actually spent most of that day technically not in San Sebastian, but it's one of our all-time favorite, most fun, and wonderful eating and drinking experiences that we've ever had in any of our travels. And that was to go outside of San Sebastian to go visit a traditional Basque cider house. We were there luckily in the early season, so I think the prime time for this is probably, say, in the March area. But I think they have them open all year round. But in March, that's when they start the cider house season, and they'll start serving the cider that they just made the year before. Essentially, what going to a Basque cider house means is you're going to a very traditional-looking house that is purpose-built for this, but it doesn't really look like a restaurant. We were with a guide, so he showed us what his favorite one was to do. You can do this for lunch, you can do this for dinner, but it's basically a big open house, and when you walk inside of it, you'll see a huge row of old wooden barrels along the wall where the cider has been fermenting. Mm-hmm. And by big wooden barrels, I'm talking about ones that are 10 feet tall. They're built into the side of this building and have been there for hundreds of years. And they'll be, I think the one we went to had somewhere between 5 to 8 of these gigantic barrels. And that's where they've put the cider and they've let it be fermenting. And now it's time to drink the cider because it's now had time to make it. And so the itinerary of going to one of these Basque cider houses is the menu is always the same. And these are the courses that they serve in this order. And it seems very odd, but this is just how they always do it. The first course is chorizo sausage. Okay. The second course, they'll bring you out a cod omelet, which I know sounds weird. It's just scrambled eggs and cod, but it actually was good. Then they'll bring you some more roasted cod with green peppers. It always has to be with green peppers. It's never not with green peppers.
And love the green peppers there. So that we're not a cod fan, but okay.
Yeah. And then the last one that they'll bring you is a huge medium rare steak. So if you can imagine whatever you think of as a huge Tuscan Florentine type steak, it's exactly the same thing, meaning it's gigantic, enormous, and it's cooked like a Florentine steak is, which is just barely seared. And then they'll bring you, after the steak, they bring you Basque sheep cheese, and then they serve you for dessert walnuts and quince jelly. So it's a very interesting set of things to eat. in a very unusual order, and it's essentially all you can eat. Now, we did not make any attempt to eat even everything that we were brought as the main course, but apparently if you're in that area, you can just sit there all day long and have as many of these steaks or any of the other dishes as you would want. And during the whole time that they're bringing these dishes, so they bring them out one at a time. So I was going to say it's like a tasting menu, but every one of these dishes is a full-size meal. So it's not even close to being a tasting menu. But everybody during these meals is milling around all of these huge barrels, and periodically someone will yell, "Chotch." And as soon as somebody yells that, then everybody goes over to wherever the barrel was that person yelled, and there's literally a person that works at the restaurant on a ladder next to the barrel, and he's either got his finger or a little wood peg in a hole, and they literally just pull it out of this hole, the finger or a little wood peg, and the cider is just free flowing. There's no pump, there's no tap, it's just flowing out. And all the people that are there, who obviously have done this way more times than we've done it, know roughly where that's going to come out on the other end, and they try to position their cup so that it lands in the cup. And of course, it's never perfect. It's splattering all over the place, all over the people, all over the floor. And then just people line up one after the other. So once you know where the end of this 10-foot stream is hitting, 10 people, 20 people will just line up, and they'll just go one after the other. And you only get maybe like a third of a cup at a time, because the idea is that you want to drink it immediately while it's still fizzy, and you got this really long pour, and people will just cycle through until there's nobody in line, and then they'll stick a peg back in it, and then, the first person that gets thirsty 15 minutes from there will yell "Chotch" again, and they'll do it again. So you just eat and drink, and
That's
it's
funny.
all you can eat and all you can drink. And I can't remember how much it cost per person, but it was ridiculously inexpensive to have as much food and cider as we had that day.
That's funny.
But it was a very fun experience. So I would highly recommend doing that for anybody that had another day in San Sebastian. And then we went back at the end of the day and then just saw more of the city, but I don't think we ate dinner that night. So that is that day of San Sebastian. So the next day we left San Sebastian. So this would be day 5 of the itinerary. We actually got a rental car because I think to hit some of the other areas, it was easier to get a car. You wouldn't have to do it this way, but it was pretty easy to get the car. We rented a car and we drove along the beach. So you're just following the coast from San Sebastian. And the next place that we stayed at was a little town called Guetaria. And it's just a very cute coastal town, very small. You see all of the beautiful ocean. There's vineyards and wineries all around that area that are making the chocolatey wine. So we wanted to go there and see the vineyards and do a wine tasting there. And in this very small town of Guetaria, which again, it's very pretty, but it's very small. But it reminds me of a lot of things in the Basque Country where you're unexpectedly surprised about how much stuff there can be in some of these small places. So for instance, in Guetaria, if you're an Anthony Bourdain fan, this is one of the places that he puts in his Basque Country San Sebastian itinerary. And there's a Michelin star restaurant there that's famous for its grilled fish. So they basically just catch the fish, put them on these special charcoal smokers, and it's delicious. It was wonderful. It was not expensive at all. It really wasn't that hard to get into, but you would not have expected that would be where that place would be in this small beach town.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to tell you that Michelob Ultra is giving you the chance to win tickets to the NBA Finals. That's right, the 2025 NBA Finals. Just head to MichelobUltra.com/NBA Finals. Michelob Ultra Courtside NBA Finals Sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents, excluding Maryland residents. 21 up. Begins at 9 a.m. EST on February 16, 2025. Ends on May 5th, 2025. See official rules at michelobultra.com/rules for price and details. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Also in this small beach town, for anybody that's interested in fashion, the famous fashion designer Cristobal Valencia was from here. That person went on to be famous in Paris and New York and many other places. But this is the place that person was from. And there's a very large modern museum, modern looking in the sense of its architecture, in this little small town that's dedicated to all of his works and all of his fashion design, which again, unless you knew that was there, you would no way expect there to be something that impressive in this little bitty small town.
And you mentioned this being the hometown of him, and it's also got at least one other famous local son who you mentioned previously.
Correct, yeah. So the navigator that took over from Magellan, his name was Elcano, and that's what the name of the famous Michelin restaurant is. They named it after him. And so they've got a big statue down by the port of him, and that's their very proud hometown son. And it's got a pretty port. There's a nice, pretty walk that you can do down to the ocean. So there's plenty to do in Guitarria there, just to wander around and see things, fun things to eat, fun wineries to go to. And then when I was there, just because I like doing this, some of the Camino de Santiago goes literally right through this town. So if you wanted to do some of the hike, you could do it all the way from San Sebastian to Guitarria in one day. I actually did that one day because I had a little bit extra time. But it's a beautiful hike, whether you were wanting to do the Camino or just walk a little bit along the coast. It's very well marked. It's beautiful. And as you said before, if you have a good weather day where it's not raining, it's absolutely stunning to walk along it.
You got there by car. I actually got there by boat on a tour.
Nice.
So you can get there by boat from San Sebastian and then take a bus back. There are tours that visit there from either Bilbao on the west or San Sebastian in the east. But pretty little town, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's very pretty all along the coast. We did it just because we wanted to explore the coast and have a little more flexibility to go out to the wineries. But so I would recommend, even if you couldn't overnight there and you were just passing through, to at least stop there. We actually stayed overnight. Glad we did that. So that would be my recommendation, would be spend the day and the night in that town because there's a lot to see and it's very pretty. So then once you leave Guitarria, so now we're on day 6. So again, we had a car, so we could explore the coast as you're going towards Bilbao. And it's, again, a beautiful coastline. As you leave Guitarria, there's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site because there's 23 kilometers of a very interesting sheer cliff fronting the ocean. And they're really unique looking rock formations. If you've ever been to a place like Iceland and you see the very unusual rock formations that you sometimes see from the volcanic areas there, they've got something similar in this coastal area. And it goes for 23 miles. And so it's fun and really pretty to see. Another thing that's right in the middle of that area, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, there is a hermit and a small church that's out on a very precarious rocky outcrop that has a very small stairway that goes all the way out there, but it's very long. The stairway goes for, several football fields worth in length out there. And that was the setting, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, for Dragonstone, the kind of rocky place in the Game of Thrones that I don't think they had to CGI much of it because it really looks as exotic and crazy as it does when you watch the show. If you're along that coast and you want to make a stop and go out to the small hermitage that's out there, it's a really amazing, beautiful sight to walk out there.
And were you going to try and pronounce the Basque name of that place?
No, I intentionally skipped even trying to pronounce it because some of the other places I've at least heard somebody pronounce them before, so I can copy it, but I don't know that I've ever heard anybody try to say this word, and so I'm not even going to try. But I'm sure you can see it in the show notes, and everybody can make their own attempt to try to pronounce that. I would call it Dragonstone.
Try and pronounce it here, and I know I'm going to butcher it because I cannot pronounce Basque. But it's Gazteluggatse. So it's something like Gaztelugatse. or something like that. But
I'm glad that you tried it more than me. It had way too many Z's and X's. That's one of the interesting things when you try to read the signs here, or like the chocolatey wine. There's just this strange assortment of a T next to an X next to a Z, and I don't have
yeah,
any idea how
yeah,
to pronounce those.
it feels like somebody was trying to get a high score in Scrabble.
If you could use one of those words and convince somebody.
I do know that the GATX part of that is hard or inaccessible, which is exactly what that word is for me.
When we were passing from Guitaria to Bilbao, that's more of a just stop along the coast and occasionally see some pictures. If you've got a car, it
Yeah.
makes it really easy to navigate. But there's definitely some places worth stopping along the way. But really, you want to get on day 6 into Bilbao, because that's the day that I would recommend to go see the Guggenheim. The Guggenheim is the famous museum that's there in Bilbao. It's absolutely stunning. I view the Guggenheim as two different things. There's the Guggenheim from the outside, and the grounds around the museum are full of very interesting artwork. You don't have to pay. You can just wander around. You don't have to get a ticket. You're just looking at this really amazing piece of architecture that houses this amazing museum. And then the second half of the Guggenheim is actually going inside and seeing all the artwork itself. But you can spend at least a half of a day, at least if you follow this itinerary, just looking at the Guggenheim, exploring the outside, and then going inside of it and exploring the inside of it as well. And they've done an amazing job of the area that they built it in, where it's all been redeveloped with hotels and shops, and everything is shiny and glitzy and modern, just like the museum is itself. And there's definitely a lot to see just to see the museum itself.
Yeah, this was a very industrial area that they have reclaimed, and they are still in the process of taking other parts of Bilbao and reclaiming it. You still can't swim in the river there because it apparently has all sorts of industrial flotsam and jetsam in there, at least jetsam. And yeah, the Bilbao, I love the museum architecturally. It doesn't take that long to see because it has a surprisingly small number of very large exhibits inside, all modern art.
Yeah, and they definitely are all modern, both the inside and the outside of it. But I think it's at least worth a good chunk of a day just walking around and seeing it and exploring it, because that area around the museum, as you said, they've done an amazing job of taking what probably was a very ugly old industrial area and completely revitalized it to make it something that people might actually travel to see, versus I'm sure the opposite was true. And then I saved for the last day, so this is day 7 of our trip, I saved the last part, but then go and explore the old town of Bilbao, because as you would expect, there's an old part of town that doesn't have any of the modern side of things, and it's very interesting to see. There's beautiful old buildings, cathedrals, again, markets. There's a Basque museum here as well. So this is the opposite bookend of, if you didn't get to see the Basque museum in France, or if you want to see it in two different ways, then you can see the second Basque museum here. But they've got an excellent Basque museum here in Bilbao as well. A lot of Art Deco looking buildings. So that part I found that was really neat to continue to see just a very different style of architecture, which I think is true throughout the Basque Country. I mean, you're going to see what you might think of as French architecture and Spanish architecture in a lot of the places, but you're also going to see a lot of what I would think is very unique Basque architecture, and then a lot of Belle Epoque and neoclassical Art Deco looking type buildings in all of these cities. So I thought that was a really cool, interesting thing to see both in Bilbao and some of the other places as well. So for sure, when you're in Bilbao, make sure you get a chance to see the old part of town, because it's beautiful as well. And then I would say make sure you end up your final day of your trip and do another Pinchos walking tour, because you can do that in San Sebastian. That's definitely the capital of doing it, but it was excellent in Bilbao as well. We really had a good time anytime we stopped and tried to do Pinchos and bar hopping. Don't leave the Basque Country without at least trying it one more time.
The other thing I'll say is, if you are a fan of art, if you're going to the Bilbao because you're a fan of modern art, there is also a fine art museum. It was closed when I was there. They were doing a major renovation. I believe it has reopened, but you might double check whether it is open when you're there if you are an art fan.
So that's the 7-day itinerary. I think I would say that if you were, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you were trying to link this trip at the beginning with other places in France, you could easily do that. Bordeaux is not really that far away, and certainly you
Right.
could get from Paris not that hard either. And then on the tail end, depending on if you wanted to spend some more time in the Spanish region, once you got to Bilbao, you're very close to Pamplona, which I didn't talk about, but that's another big part of the Basque Country, a very interesting
Right.
place to see. Guernica is another very interesting place to see.
We have talked about Pamplona on a previous episode, so anybody
Yep.
who's interested in that can go back
Yep.
in the archives to learn more about Pamplona.
So you could very easily go from this area to other places or go down into
Right.
Rioja and see more of Spain. But if you're just trying to cover the Basque Country, I think this is a good 7-day itinerary that keeps you from one end to the other end, and you really get to explore it well.
Excellent. One other place that I would add in Bilbao is for a great view of the city, which is this city along the river here. There is a mountain opposite the city, Mount, and it's again one of these Basque words here. I'm going to say Artzanda, but I don't know if that's how it's really pronounced in Basque, but that has a great view point. Also, one of those Instagrammable signs about Bilbao from there.
No, I think that's good advice.
And then when I was there, actually, a couple things that we did out in the countryside that are worth mentioning, and you can go take a look at my blog post to hear more about them. But there is one thing that we went to, which is Torre Loizaga, and it is an old medieval tower, but it also has the largest museum in Europe that is the most complete Rolls-Royce collection. And
Wow.
so this is
Okay.
going back to the really old cars, which I think are just fascinating looking, as well as a lot of silver shadows and stuff, which honestly don't do as much for me as seeing those old cars. But it's just out at this old medieval tower and this family farm out there. So
Wow.
fascinating. And then we went also out to a beret museum because the Basques are known for the origin of the beret. And so this was an old, still operating factory tour that you could do and see this old water driven machinery here creating berets in what was a factory town at the time. And both of those, there's links to that in the blog post I did on San Sebastian and Bilbao.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Excellent. Anything else we need to know before we go to Basque Country?
I think that covered it. I think that plus your advice is a good list of things to do.
Excellent. You are standing in the prettiest spot in all of Basque Country. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I think I'll have to agree with your description earlier. I had written down that you would be standing on the top of Monte Aguildo, which is that mountain on one end of the beach. It's the one that has the kids' park on the top of it. But you're standing on top of that as the sun goes down. You're looking out over the whole beach area and the promenade area with the beautiful bright blue ocean all behind you. All the surfers are in the beach, and all of San Sebastian is spread out below you, and you can see it from one end to the other. That, I think, was our prettiest sight when we were there.
Excellent. Yep, that makes perfect sense to me. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Basque Country.
I think it probably, as you and I have been trying to pronounce some of these words as we've gone through, but that's, I think, trying to read signs anywhere in the Basque
my.
Country, whether they're street signs or whether they're signs to the museum, and the font looks Celtic looking, so you think maybe it is, but then you think maybe it's French or Spanish because you're on one side of the border, but neither one helps, and the whole sign is full of X's and Z's, and it's even almost laughs to make you try to pronounce any of those.
Yep, no, my Basque has not made any progress at all, I'll have to say. And if you had to summarize this region in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I thought it would be appropriate, since we've been talking about the Basque language, that the 3 words that I would come up with are all uniquely from this region. So the first one that I would say is Basque itself, because that just makes me immediately think of this specific region and how distinct it is. The second word would be pinchos, because again, that's a very unique word from this region, which immediately makes me think, at least, of a really good food and wine experience. And the third would be the Basque cider house word of choch, because as soon as that somebody yells that makes me think of grabbing a glass and trying to stand in line to get some great cider.
I don't know what my other two words would be, but I think green would have to be one for me, both because you're in a wetter, greener area, especially if you've been to Andalusia in southern Spain. This is not that. This is very different looking from that, or from the hills around Segovia or Madrid or Toledo or things like that. Very green, very wet, and especially you talked about getting up to the wineries in Qatarya, and just gorgeous scenery here on these rolling hills between the mountains and the sea with these terraced vineyards on them. And I was there on a clear day with the beautiful blue waters and the bright green of these vineyards, and it was just stunning.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, even if you're not into long distance hiking, there's some short hikes that you could do along the Camino. And as you said, they're beautiful green hills. You've got the dazzling water on the ocean that you can see the whole way. It's not anything that challenging. They're just rolling hills and everything is green, and the vineyards and all the nice mountains coming down. But yeah, as you said, it's a beautiful, green, lush, gorgeous area just to explore.
Yep, agreed. Our guest again has been Craig from Dallas. And Craig, thanks so much for coming back on the show and sharing with us your newfound love for the Basque region of France and Spain.
Thanks so much, Chris.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
A special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. This is my day job now. And so special thanks to Dominique Galang, who became the latest patron of the show this week. Thanks, Dominic. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. We've picked the destination for the 2026 Amateur Traveler trip, and that is a trip to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Signups will begin now for the patrons of the show who get the first chance at that, and then later on we'll put out information on the email newsletter and then on the podcast. So if you're interested in getting onto the trip, you might want to join the newsletter or become a patron of the show, or just wait a week or so and you'll be able to sign up. Recent articles on the website, including visiting the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon and Diamond Beach in southeast Iceland, exploring 17-mile drive, a scenic coastal journey through Monterey and Pebble Beach, and Alaska, traveling the Inside Passage with a side trip to the Canadian Yukon. You can find all those at the website, amateurtraveler.com. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral.